At the edge of Jackson County lies Westbrook State Prison, a towering slab of steel and concrete that swallows secrets whole. Inside that cold, gray compound, where time doesn't move and redemption is a myth, stood Officer Daniel Mercer. 38, disciplined, unshakable, the kind of man who never missed a beat on his rounds and never let his feelings show. But beneath the pressed uniform and the stern jawline was a secret Daniel carried like a loaded weapon. Something he swore would never surface, something he buried so deep it became part of him. Outside the prison gates, Daniel played a different role. He was the doting husband to Claire Mercer, a third-grade teacher, and the proud father of 2 children, Eli, age 9, and Ava, age 6. A modest 2-story home in a quiet suburb, church on Sundays, barbecues on Saturdays, a golden retriever named Max. To the outside world, Daniel had it all, but behind closed doors, their bedroom was a frozen tundra. He loved Claire, but never craved her. He tried to be everything she wanted, but he was always acting. Ricky Alvarez entered Westbrook with handcuffs, an attitude, and a criminal file thick as a novel, age 27, convicted of armed robbery, aggravated assault, and unlawful use of a firearm. He and 2 associates had held up a pawn shop in broad daylight. When the owner resisted, Ricky pistol-whipped him, leaving the man with a fractured skull. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years. But Ricky wasn't the kind to be humbled by prison. If anything, it made him bolder. He walked into Westbrook like he owned the place, with a smirk, slicked-back hair, and eyes that looked through people. Daniel first saw Ricky during evening rounds in Cell Block C. There was something about him, his posture, the way he stood at the bars like he was posing for a camera, daring someone to look. Their eyes locked, just for a second. Daniel looked away, fast, but Ricky didn't. He held the gaze like trap had been sprung, and Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not desire. No, not yet. It was recognition. Like Ricky had found the one thing Daniel worked so hard to hide. Daniel wasn't always this man in uniform. In high school, he had dreams of being a firefighter. But even then, he knew he was different. He remembered gym class, locker rooms, the nervous glances. He remembered sneaking out at night to drive an hour away, just to walk past gay bars and wonder. But in a family where real men hunted, drank, and talked football, there was no space for softness. So he buried it all. He dated girls, married Claire, had kids, and still, something inside him never stopped aching. For weeks, Daniel avoided Ricky, taking alternate routes, handing off duties to other guards. But Ricky made it difficult. He was loud, charming, and magnetic. Everyone noticed him. Sometimes he'd wink during roll call. Sometimes he'd hum songs with lyrics just suggestive enough to make Daniel shift uncomfortably. But the real danger wasn't what Ricky did. It was what Daniel felt. A pull, a curiosity, a hunger he thought he had starved to death. One night, Daniel was assigned to night duty in the kitchen. Ricky worked the dish line. Steam fogged the glass, sweat clung to his shirt. As Daniel passed, Ricky said, without looking, "You don't gotta run from yourself forever, Officer Mercer." Daniel froze. He turned, but Ricky was already scrubbing plates like nothing had happened. That was the first time Daniel felt something crack inside him. Something more dangerous than lust. Recognition. Days later, during lunch duty, Ricky passed Daniel and said softly, "I used to lie to myself too. Then I figured, what's the point of dying without ever living?" No threat, no proposition, just words. But they landed like punches. Daniel didn't sleep that night, his wife noticed. "You okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Yeah," he lied, "just tired." The first physical touch wasn't planned. The kitchen freezer was broken, and Daniel had to oversee cleanup. Ricky was stacking crates behind the cooler. It was cramped. Daniel turned the corner and, bam, collided into Ricky. A heartbeat, a hand on Daniel's chest. He didn't move. Neither did Ricky. Then Daniel stepped back, fast, guilty, scared. But Ricky just smiled and whispered, still pretending. At home, Claire noticed the changes. Daniel didn't look at her the same way. He came home late. He stared at his phone. They hadn't been intimate in months. One night she tried, touched his hand, kissed his neck. He pulled away, mumbling, "I'm just not in the mood." But Claire wasn't stupid. She didn't know what was wrong, but she knew something was, and it terrified her. It happened late on a Thursday. Daniel found Ricky alone in the laundry room. Cameras weren't working, an ongoing repair delay Ricky had somehow orchestrated. They didn't speak. Daniel stood in the doorway like a man possessed. Ricky stepped closer, close enough to hear his breath. And then, Daniel kissed him, hard, desperate, like a man drowning and finally inhaling water. It was a moment he'd regret and crave again. Daniel spent the next morning vomiting in the staff restroom. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a mistake, a breakdown. But he couldn't erase the feeling. The way Ricky's lips lingered in his memory like a brand. When he got home, Claire tried to talk. He snapped at her. He apologized immediately. But something was unraveling. Fast. Ricky wasn't dumb. He knew what power looked like, and he knew he had it now. He slipped Daniel a folded note during breakfast detail. No threats, just a sentence. Same time, Saturday, behind the mess hall, say the word, shadow. Daniel flushed the note, burned inside. But on Saturday, he went. That second encounter wasn't a kiss. It was everything. Hands, mouth, breath. Daniel gave in, completely. All the years of repression broke like glass. And Ricky? He took what he wanted. Smooth. In control. Knowing exactly how deep Daniel's shame ran. Weeks passed. The affair became a routine. Secret rendezvous behind the laundry room. Hidden touches between security checks. Daniel started requesting assignments that would place him near Ricky's unit. He told himself it wasn't love, that it wasn't even real. But every lie only dug him deeper. One evening, Daniel came home late. Again, Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched dinner. "I called your phone 4 times. "I was busy. Inmate fight," Daniel lied. She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe a word. Ricky's tone started to change. He'd make jokes. "So what would your wife think if she knew about all this?" Daniel would flinch, bark back, threaten consequences. But Ricky wasn't scared. "I'm not dumb, officer. You need me more than I need you." Daniel panicked. He filed a transfer request to move Ricky to a different wing, but the paperwork mysteriously disappeared. Ricky had connections, guards who owed him, inmates who could make things go away. Daniel was trapped, in the very system he used to control. One day Ricky pushed too far. "You ever think about what your kids will say when they find out? What your church friends will think?" Daniel shoved him against the wall, hard. A camera caught it. Internal Affairs reviewed it. Daniel was written up. And Ricky? He smiled through the whole thing. Claire found the shirt first, hidden under Daniel's work clothes. A white undershirt, not hers, and not Daniel's. It smelled of cheap cologne and prison soap. She didn't say anything that night, but something inside her shifted. She no longer feared something was wrong. She knew it. Daniel started switching shifts with other officers, trying to avoid Ricky, but it was too late. Ricky had figured out the blueprint of Daniel's shame. All it took was a whispered comment, a smirk, a slip of a note, and Daniel was drawn right back in. Claire stood in their bedroom doorway one night, watching Daniel stared blankly at the wall. "You don't even look at me anymore," she said. Daniel blinked. "I'm tired." "No, you're hiding." But she didn't push further, because deep down, she feared the truth would destroy everything. After another night together, Ricky leaned in close and whispered, "I've been writing a letter. For your wife. With details." Daniel froze. "I wouldn't send it. Unless you give me a reason." And just like that, the affair became a weapon. Ricky was no longer just a lover. He was a liability. Daniel started making mistakes at work. He forgot to sign reports. He missed head counts. Warden Stokes pulled him into his office. "You okay, Mercer?" "Yeah, just family stuff." But the warden wasn't convinced, and Daniel knew it. His control was slipping, and he could feel it. At home, Claire found a notebook hidden behind the laundry detergent. It wasn't labeled, but inside were pages, drawings, scribbles, notes, some in Daniel's handwriting, some in someone else's. One sentence repeated 4 times. "I wish I was someone else." Claire confronted him the next night. "Are you having an affair?" Daniel's jaw locked. "No." "With a man?" His eyes flared. "What the hell are you talking about?" She showed him the notebook. He grabbed it, tore it in half. "That's not what you think." But it was. Daniel's heart raced every time he walked past Ricky now. He didn't feel desire anymore. He felt trapped. He was a cornered animal, his secret life poisoning everything he'd tried to build. Ricky saw it, too. "Feels good being in control, doesn't it?" he teased. Daniel said nothing, but his silence was a warning. Then came the real threat. Ricky handed Daniel a sealed envelope. "1 copy. Yours? Another one? Mailed to your house if anything happens to me." Inside were photos, evidence. Daniel with Ricky, in compromising positions. Undeniable. Damning. Daniel's hands trembled as he held it. His world had just been set on fire. Ricky smiled like the devil himself. "All I want? A few favors, extra privileges, certain foods, certain transfers. You say no, your life ends as you know it." Daniel nodded slowly, but something inside him cracked. He was a man pushed to the edge, and people pushed that far don't always return. Daniel couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, listened to the sound of his wife breathing next to him. He knew what had to be done. He couldn't lose his wife, his children, his job, and he couldn't let Ricky destroy him. So he made a decision, not out of hate, but fear. Daniel started researching in secret, how to tamper with prison footage, how to manipulate shift logs, how to make an inmate's death look like an accident or a suicide. His search history became a roadmap to murder. Every click whispered, "You're already too far gone." Daniel approached Officer Brady, an old drinking buddy with loose ethics. "I need you to cover for me Thursday night. Just mark me on duty." Brady raised an eyebrow. "What's this about?" Daniel smiled. "Family thing." Brady shrugged. "You owe me a bottle of scotch." The first brick of the alibi was in place. Ricky received a slip under his bunk mattress. "Meet me. Storage room 4, 2:30 a.m. Come alone." He smirked. He thought he was winning. He didn't know he'd just accepted his death sentence. At home, Claire couldn't shake the feeling. Daniel was quieter, colder. She noticed the bruises on his knuckles. She found a small hidden box in the shed. Inside, a USB stick and burner phone. She didn't open them, but her gut told her, he's about to do something irreversible. As Ricky walked down the corridor, he passed another inmate who muttered, "Dead man walking." Ricky laughed. He thought he was untouchable. He thought Daniel wouldn't dare. He was wrong. 2:28 a.m. Daniel was already in storage room 4. He wore gloves, no badge, no radio. He'd disabled the hallway camera hours earlier. When Ricky walked in, he grinned. Couldn't stay away. Daniel shut the door. "No more threats," he whispered. Ricky's smile faded. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fast. Ricky fought back, fists flying, gasping for air. He screamed once, but the thick walls held the sound. Daniel wrapped a belt around his neck. Tighter, tighter, until Ricky's body stilled. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel dragged the body to a nearby utility closet. He placed a bottle of pills beside Ricky's hand, slashed his wrists, post-mortem. He returned to the surveillance room, re-enabled the cameras, and logged himself in at a different location. It was brutal. It was calculated. It was murder. At 4:07 a.m., an inmate screamed. Guards rushed in. Ricky Alvarez was found cold, pale, lifeless. The scene was ruled a suicide. No one questioned it. Not yet. Daniel returned home that morning. He kissed Claire, made breakfast for the kids. He felt normal, lighter. He thought it was over. He thought he was free. But secrets buried in prison walls don't stay buried forever. Ricky Alvarez's body was sent for routine autopsy. The coroner noted something strange. Wrist wounds looked post-mortem. Ligature marks around the neck were inconsistent with hanging. It was ruled possible suicide, but flagged for further review. That small red flag would soon wave like a storm warning. The prison warden contacted Internal Affairs. It was standard, but something about Daniel Mercer's shift schedule didn't sit right. He was marked present, but the footage, missing for 2 hours. That's when the questions started. Claire finally opened the burner phone. Text messages, photos. A message from Ricky that read, "Your husband isn't who you think he is." Her heart pounded as she scrolled through blurred images of Daniel and Ricky together. She dropped the phone. She didn't scream. She just cried. IA agent Monica James sat across from Daniel in the staff lounge. "Where were you between 2 and 4 a.m.? Daniel replied, "On routine perimeter." "Alone?" "Yes." She leaned forward. "Do you know inmate Ricky Alvarez?" Daniel flinched, slightly, but enough. Officer Brady, the one who covered Daniel's shift, started to panic. He'd heard whispers about Ricky's death. He didn't want to be involved. He quietly went to IA and confessed. Just like that, Daniel's alibi collapsed. Inmates began to talk. Ricky had dirt on a guard. Used to meet in storage rooms. One swore they saw Daniel sneak into cell block B when he wasn't on duty. Rumors became evidence. The noose was tightening. Claire walked into the station with the burner phone and USB. She handed them over without a word. When asked if she knew the man in the pictures, she simply said, "He's my husband." The betrayal broke her. But the lies? They burned her from the inside out. Daniel sat in a cold room, wrists cuffed to the table. "Tell us what happened," Agent James demanded. "I don't know anything." She slid the photos across the table. Ricky, him, together. She said, "He threatened to expose you, didn't he?" Daniel lowered his head and said nothing. Daniel Mercer was arrested and charged with the murder of Ricky Alvarez. The mugshot showed a man hollowed out by secrets. His uniform, once a badge of honor, was now a symbol of disgrace. The media called him the lover guard. The headlines screamed betrayal. Daniel was processed into the very system he once policed. Same walls, same cells. But now he wasn't a guard. He was just another number. Inmate number 34291. And somewhere in those echoing halls, Ricky's ghost lingered, watching. The story made national news. A married correctional officer murders inmate lover to protect his secret life. Photos of Daniel and Claire. Photos of Ricky in his orange jumpsuit. Talk shows speculated. Podcasts dissected. The world now knew what Daniel had spent a lifetime hiding. Claire couldn't leave the house. Paparazzi staked her lawn. Parents from her children's school whispered behind her back. She wasn't just mourning a marriage. She was grieving the man she thought she knew. "I didn't just lose a husband," she whispered to a friend. "I lost my identity." Gloria Alvarez, Ricky's mother, appeared on live TV. "My son wasn't perfect, but he didn't deserve this." She clutched a framed photo of Ricky as a boy, before the streets, before prison. He was turning his life around. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "My son didn't kill himself. A guard did." Daniel's first week as an inmate was brutal. Guards he once supervised now ignored his calls. Inmates mocked him. "Hey Mercer, you gonna fall in love again?" He stayed in solitary for his own protection. But the silence was its own kind of punishment. Prosecutors built their case brick by brick. Text messages, photos, shift logs, the surveillance blackout, the murder weapon, Daniel's belt, and the note in Ricky's handwriting. He said if I told anyone, he'd ruin me. That note sealed Daniel's fate. His defense attorney, a tired public defender, pleaded for manslaughter. He was under psychological distress. He was manipulated. He panicked. But the prosecution fired back. He had power, he had motive, and he made a plan. No one was buying the sympathy card. Courtroom packed. Claire sat in the second row, pale and unreadable. Gloria Alvarez sat across the aisle, a handkerchief balled in her fist. Daniel entered in shackles, eyes lowered. For the first time in weeks, he looked human again. Broken, but human.
Former inmates testified. Yeah, they were close. Too close. A fellow officer said, "He asked me to lie about his shift." Claire took the stand. The prosecutor held up the burner phone. "Was your husband having an affair with a man?" She hesitated. "Yes." On day 5 of the trial, Daniel finally spoke. "I didn't mean to kill him. He was going to destroy my life. I loved him, and I hated him for that." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Claire quietly stood and walked out. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Daniel Mercer to 35 years in prison. No parole for 20. As he was led away, he didn't look at Claire. He didn't look at anyone. He just kept walking. Daniel Mercer was processed into the very system he once governed. No special treatment, no favors, just another inmate in a beige jumpsuit. He was transferred to a maximum security facility 3 hours from his old post. There were whispers waiting for him before he even arrived. The guards called him Mercer the Murderer. The inmates? Warden's pet. He was marked. Not just as a killer, but as a traitor to the badge. The unspoken rule was clear. Never bring your secrets into prison. He had brought all of his. Claire sold the house. She went back to her maiden name. She started therapy. For the first time, she admitted it out loud. "I married a man who never loved me the way I thought," she cried. Then, she started healing. Daniel began writing letters. To Claire, to his children, to the Alvarez family. Most were never sent. Some were returned unopened. One read, "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't think I ever did." By the end of his first year, Daniel had been in 3 fights, 2 hospital visits, 1 suicide attempt. The man who once commanded fear and respect now clung to survival. Every night he dreamed of Ricky, sometimes as a lover, sometimes as a ghost. A true crime author contacted Claire, wanted to write a book about the case. She declined, but someone else said yes, Ricky's cousin, Marcus. The book became a bestseller. Shadows Behind Bars, Love, Lies, and Murder in Uniform. Years passed. Daniel became just another aging inmate with a tragic backstory. Most new guards didn't recognize the name. Younger inmates didn't care. But in a quiet cell, he remembered everything. And sometimes, in the dead of night, he whispered Ricky's name into the silence. The only name that still haunted him. Year 20. Daniel appeared before the parole board. He spoke softly. "I've accepted who I am. I regret what I did." But the board wasn't swayed. Ricky's mother had written a letter. It ended with, "He silenced my son. Please don't let him walk free." Parole denied. Daniel avoided mirrors. But on that day, he looked. The gray hair, the hollowness in his eyes. "I became a monster to hide from myself," he whispered. And the reflection seemed to nod. Agreeing, judging, and grieving all at once. Claire finally opened one of Daniel's letters. It was dated 5 years ago. He wrote, "Maybe I killed Ricky because he threatened me, but maybe it was because he saw me, really saw me. And I didn't know how to live with that." She cried. For both of them. This is the story of a man who lived a lie, and a man who dared him to live the truth. It ended in tragedy. But even in that tragedy, there was love. There was truth. And there was a lesson. You can't bury your heart without burying yourself. Forever.